Were you ever surprised that you're losing battles while having more troops? Were you surprised that somebody is winning the battles while having way less troops? Well, thanks to this guide, I'm going to teach you how to take 100% efficiency out of your resources. Keep in mind that I will talk about the most efficient way of doing combat. If you lack resources to do the same, just try doing it as close as possible to what I'm talking about in the guide. Hey, this is Zlewikk, and today I'm going to show you how effectively to use your armies in the combat. But before we start, congratulations to the giveaway winner for the video about top 10 nations to play in 2021, Asus 380. Please contact me via Discord. And also I have another giveaway for you guys. All you have to do to join it to win a free DLC to EU4 is to be a subscriber of this channel, leave a like on this video and comment it. We are going to start the guide with early game basic movements, then I'll talk about the mid game basic movements, and then at the end I'll move to more experienced, more advanced strategies. So in early game we of course don't have artillery, and I want to focus on combat without the artillery, as it is the only unit that actually fights in the second row and does something there. In early game we are going to prioritize to fill the first line with the troops while not having a single troop in the second row. This is going to be the most efficient way because every extra unit will end up in the second row or in the reserves. In both of those, your unit is going to get morale damage, and when it actually gets to the first row, it will be already weaker than it could, but just reinforcing the battle. Very important here is to show an example. So we are going to attack nation with same bonus as the military, exactly the same, that has superior amount of the troops. But this enemy is making a mistake. He's keeping all of his troops in one province, which is way over the combat width. So as we have less troops, what I'm going to do is to attack and engage on him with exactly the same amount of the troops as is the combat width, and then I'm going to reinforce the battle with a few thousand every few days. This time I'll be trying to reinforce the troops that are dying in the first row. So we'll be keeping the whole first row filled while not getting many troops in the second row or to the reserves. And as you can see, this might be a great way to win against superior enemy. Usually it works against the AIs and even in the multiplayer, because not all of the players know this strategy and they might just overstack a lot by sending everything at once into the battle. If you want to see a little bit more of action in the early game battles, you can check this episode of my ruined campaigns where I'm exactly fighting a superior enemy with way more troops and I'm getting as efficient battles as possible in early game. Probably your basic question is, should I use cavalry in early game as non-cavalry nation? Well, the answer is it depends, but in general, as you remember, I'm not the biggest fan of cavalry and I wouldn't suggest using it. But you can use it, especially in single player, if you know that you are going to fight with enemy with inferior numbers to yours. Of course, on top of that, you also need to have enough money to maintain these troops, and if you have both, then you can recruit either 2,000 or 4,000 cavalry per stack, depending on how much force limit you have and how much infantry in the armies. Now, why did I mention that you can use it if you are going to fight inferior enemies? Well, basic units, so infantry, is attacking only troops that are ahead of them. One troop that is face to face with them. So it means infantry has one flanking range. Cavalry in the meantime has flanking range of 2, so it means it can attack troops on the right or on the left from it. So when you have more troops than your enemy, then actually cavalry might not be attacked by any infantry while flanking it and killing it. It will help you get easy stack wipes against enemies that have less troops than you. But keep in mind, it might not really work against players, especially if there is bigger battles and you fill the whole combat with. Then there is nothing to flank, you're just using bigger damage of cavalry, which is not as bigger as its maintenance. The last thing here is to shift consolidate your troops. What is that and why would you do that? So when you finish the battle, of course, some of your troops will die. It means your regiments will be lacking men, and if your regiment, for example, has 500 people on the 1000, they will only fight with 50% of their capacity in the next battle, which we don't really want to happen. That's why consolidating your troops will get those men into single stacks, so we'll be having 1000 on 1000 stacks that will fight with whole strength. Now, if you want to shift consolidate or just consolidate, it depends on you. So for example, you don't have manpower and you are over the force limit, then you might consider just consolidating your troops. But when you know that you have a lot of manpower and you can reinforce all of your troops, just shift consolidate just before the battle to get into it with the full strength. We don't want these empty regiments to really fight in the battlefield. Now we are going to move to the basic combat with the artillery, but again, everything that I'm talking here about is about the perfect gameplay on how it should look like perfectly. But when you're playing in the single player, then you don't have to be really 100% efficient, especially against the AI. So I'm just showing you the perfect way and how you're going to use it. You just get as close as possible according to your resources. But in some cases, like a really coalition war and a lot of cases from my ruined campaigns, you really should do that, and that might help you win even unwinnable wars. Also a reminder that everything works around your combat width. If you want to know a little bit more about that, check my army composition guide linked here. There's a myth that you shouldn't use much of artillery in the battles before tech 17 or 23. Well, yes, artillery does way more damage on these technologies, but as soon as it happens, and what is important, and when you can afford it, then you should use it, especially in the very important wars. So if you want to be efficient, you should have the full macro of artillery as soon as it unlocks. As an example is my recent war in Florence on the multiplayer, where I was fighting with enemies that were having superior amount of the troops, but what I managed to do is to get 13,000 of artillery. Maybe I wasn't 100% efficient here, but that was as close as I could get, while my enemies just had 2,000 artillery, and it kept winning me many battles, because artillery is the only unit that does any damage in the second row. And any damage in the second row is better than no damage in the second row. And on top of that, remember, artillery gives half of its defensive pips to the first row. So it might be also useful, especially if you go later into the game when it gets more pips. Now when you enter the battle and you have a stack with artillery, the most basic rule is to not have more artillery than the first row troops, because if it happens, well, then artillery will end up in the first row where it will just basically die. So minimum is to have at least the same amount of the first row and the artillery. So for example, if your current combat weight is 34, then in a very efficient way you're going to enter the battle with stack 34-0-34. But keep in mind, if you expect a bigger battle than just that, and you expect your enemy to bring more troops, then you need to be ready to reinforce this right away, because your infantry will die quickly, and when it dies, your first line will break and artillery will get into the first row. That's why it might vary here. You might be either able to reinforce right away with having reinforcements, which I will talk about soon, or just get a little bit more infantry than artillery, so you will be more safe with the reinforcements. For example, if you know that you're playing on the steppes with huge differences on the distance, which might be also scorched. About scorched I will talk also in the future. Just, you know, it's not like you need to be 34-0-34, it needs to be dependent on the situation. If you know that reinforcements will take ages, then it's better to get more infantry into your main stack. Now talking about reinforcements. Well, to avoid your battles from getting to the first row, as mentioned, and especially in the MP where your enemy is thinking a little bit more than AI, you need to have some amount of the reserves in the battle. In early game, 10 or 20,000 of reserves is an enormous amount and might be even considered overstacking, because there are not so many troops dying on each day of the battle, but when the time passes, the damage is increasing significantly. And 30,000 reserves in late game might die even in 3 days of the battle, which is not really good for you. So, on what you should look when you are planning to get some reserves into your battle? Well, first of all, you need to imagine how many troops you'll die when you roll 0 to 9 on the fire phase. So for example, in the late game, well, 30,000 is absolute minimum. But of course, you need to also count how many days you'll take to get into the battle. If you know that you'll take 30 days in the battle, well, then you need to imagine how many troops you can lose with bad rolls in these 30 days and just take a little bit more of them to keep them in reserves. So for example, in very big late game wars, the reserves are usually 80 to 100,000 because like the rule is, you might try to be as efficient as possible, but if you get really bad rolls, then it's better to be safe than sorry. Because if you get 3 zeros in a row and reinforce too late because of that, well, it's better to overstack a little bit. And of course, once again, why is it important to keep reserves? Because as soon as your first line breaks, because it doesn't have any reserves, your artillery goes into the first row. And when it gets to the first row, well, in most of the cases you already lost the battle. I will remind it even again, because it is a most common mistake for people that understand reinforcements more or less, but they are trying to be too efficient. And in most of the cases, they just end up with artillery in the first row and reinforcing too late. So again, it's better to be a little bit more safe than sorry. The last thing in the basic combat, remember about shift consolidating here as well. Of course, it was basic in the early game, but it's even more basic when the game goes. If you had 300,000 troops in the battle and you're getting into another battle right away, and all of them have empty regiments, this will not end up well for you. Alright guys, now the true fun begins here. Because more advanced strategies will be super useful, both in the multiplayer of course, but also against AIs if you want to win the unwinnable wars like in the ruined campaigns. Anything that I told you already should be enough to win against most of AIs and even most of the unexperienced players. First advanced strategy that is really close to a basic one, but is a little bit more advanced, is of course Scorched Earth. Scorched Earth might both make you win battles against AIs and the players, just in a different way. How does the Scorched Earth work? When you click this little button, all of nations that are enemies of the nation that controls the province are going to go in and out of this province 50% slower. Believe me, that's a lot, especially if you play in Asia where the province is a little bit bigger than in Europe. Now, when can you use that? You can use that against AI when you see that he's going with a lot of troops one after another. Then you can actually have a possibility to stack wipe them one after another, because he's sending them in a couple of even 10 or 15 days difference. With Scorched Earth it will be even slower, so you can just stack wipe one troop, then another will get stack wipe another and stack wipe another. That happens a lot because AI plays pretty widely with their stacks, especially if they have a lot of troops. But it doesn't mean that it will not work against players that will think a little bit more. Remember about the rule about reinforcements. Players are thinking how many troops they will get killed until they reinforce, but they're usually counting that when there is no Scorched Earth. So if you Scorched Earth, he's going to reinforce the province 50% slower, and because of that, he might reinforce too late and his artillery will go into the first row. This is super strong and it works on most of the players. And just keep in mind, when you're on the other side, when you're attacking a player that controls the province, always check if it's scorched, because you need to adjust your reinforcements, just reinforce earlier than you should normally in such case. Another thing is terrain. I didn't talk about it earlier because I consider it very basic knowledge. So what I want to talk a little bit more about here in the advanced knowledge is to use the simple terrain map mode, because it does not only show you the terrain of the province, but also every single crossing. You can see these blue lines, those are crossing of the rivers. Because if forces of you and your enemy are really close to each other, which happens a lot in multiplayers, then you should look for the battles when you of course get advantage of the terrain of the crossing, but also you should avoid getting battles with the negative modifiers. And what is also important here, it's not even combat, is to build your forts not only in a good terrain, but you should also look on the crossings, because for example hill with crossings all around it might be as powerful as the mountain without the crossing. Third strategy here is your back rows. So at one point of the game you might consider not recruiting one back row of artillery, but maybe two, either 3 or even 4 depending on the situation or how is it complicated. Why is that? This might be very helpful because when your main stack is fighting the main stack of your enemy, you both have reinforcements, right, to reinforce this battle. So what you can do, you can take the second back row stack go around and just catch these reinforcements and stack wipe them easily, because just infantry reinforcers will die against the full stack with the artillery. It works both against AI and the players, and especially against the players, keep in mind that it works both ways, so the player can do it against you as well, and that's why at some point of the game you should get more back rolls than one. In the multiplayer it's usually around 250, 200 of force limit, when you should get at least a second back roll of your artillery. And as a continuation of the previous point, interception of the reinforcements. So if your enemy is reinforcing the main battle just from one province, what you can do is to take a stack. In early game it might be even a 10 or 20k stack, in late game just a full back roll stack, and attack those reinforcements. Why would you do that? You do that to buy some time to win the main battle, because you can reinforce the main battle, get more troops there and win. You don't even need to win the second battle against these reinforcements. All you have to do there is to keep your troops alive in this battle long enough to win the main battle. Even if you lose this reinforcements battle, it doesn't matter if you win the main one. And that's the goal of catching of the reinforcements like this. The interception is very important both in early game and in late game. Last thing to mention here is very multiplayer, very late game, pretty complicated, and very few people know about this. So this is secret knowledge, don't tell it anyone. So in late game, if you use all of the strategies that I mentioned, there are usually 3, maybe 4 back rolls of artillery just standing in the front line and fighting 1 or 2 or maybe more battles at once. It's a pretty standard mid-game, late-game war. So what you can do is to prepare a separate full stack with back row of artillery, get into the main battle, and after 13 days, while controlling still the same army, you can click and retreat from the battle. But why would you retreat from this battle? You're retreating in order to run away on his backline. And if in this backline are just infantry stacks with no artillery, you can go around and stack wipe a few of them before your enemy even sees what's happening. But it's a very rare strat, because it's also risky. Why is that? If you do this and you run away from the main battle, the morale of the main battle drops significantly. So it means you need to overstack this a lot in order to not lose the battle, because otherwise you can troll yourself and lose the main battle because of that. And second thing, if your enemy knows well this trick and knows how to react to this, so just scorch earth on the province where you're running away and get the artillery stuck there, then he might just block it and fight it efficiently, and it's not that good. Alright guys, that's I think my longest guide that I ever created, but I wanted to share all of my knowledge about the combat in the EU4, so I hope that this will be helpful both for your single player and multiplayer games. And this is all for today, so guys, remember the giveaway, you can win a free EU4 DLC, for example Art of War. All you have to do is to be subscribed of this channel, leave a like on this video, and maybe say in comments which of these strategies is new for you, which you're going to try soon, or maybe you have any questions to me, then just ask them. So for today, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.